So welcome to the latest table talk from the sourcing table with the wonderful Rajat Parr. We're going to be talking through Raj's whole winemaking journey, including the DDLC, Sandhi wines, Evening Land, and some of his current projects, which is Field and Farm, and also the wine club wines that he makes out in the States, which are really fascinating and occasionally find their way overseas. I know a few of you actually travel out to the States from time to time, so they're ones to keep an eye on when you're over there. As always, questions are always very much encouraged. There's a chat box that I have open and we'll be monitoring. So if you want to pop your questions in there, I'll make sure they get answered. Alternatively, if you want to just pop up and unmute yourself and ask a question too, that's absolutely fine. And I've also got quite a lot of very cool maps that Raj's colleague Katie has shared with me. So I will be sharing my screen with some fun bits and bobs at some point as well. All right. So I'm going to pass you over to the man himself. So Raj, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
so I think a good place to start for people that know you but aren't as familiar with your journey as myself and some other people on this call is, so Raj used to work as a very sort of prolific sommelier and worked in the hospitality industry in the States for a long time, and obviously is now a winemaker. So Raj, what made you decide to move into winemaking? And I guess that also ties in quite nicely with how you met Sashi and why you guys decided to start your own project.
Yes, I met Sashi in 2004, and I was trying to find a way. You know, at that time I had worked the restaurant floor. Let's see, it's been at that time it had been probably only been 8 years. So I knew that eventually I'm going to, find a way out of not working, every day in restaurant till late. And so I met Sashi and we had a great connection and a great friendship, sharing bottles and talking about wines and then he was involved in planting some vineyards. He had found this piece of land, which is now Domaine de la Cote, and he shared that with me, and that's how it all began. And I'm like, wow, that, I want to be a part of that project. And we started on that in 2007, and then in 2009 we started making the Sandhi wines. And it all happened on the same time, happened really quickly. So we launched Sandhi in 2009. We produced the first vintage of Domaine de la Cote from the vineyards also in 2009, and bottled some under Sandhi, and then eventually launched the first vintage in 2011. And then quickly Evening Land happened. We acquired the Seven Springs Vineyard in 2014. So just in 5 years, we had 3 brand new, wine projects and wineries, and it happened so quickly. I can't believe it's been 15 years since the vineyards were planted in 2007. Yeah, time has definitely flown, and I'm so happy that the wines have reached the UK, because that my journey of wine started right there, because I had an uncle who lived in Tunbridge Wells, and that's the first place I tasted wine when I was 20. And so it's kind of, I'm happy that the wines are well received in the UK.
I think that's kind of an understatement. They're very popular. And I know it's been a sort of when they first came over, they maybe weren't necessarily as popular, and they didn't sell out every vintage, but that was actually a really wonderful thing, because it meant there actually were a few older vintages available as they became more popular, and sommeliers in particular really got onto these wines. I remember doing a tasting actually hosted by yourself at 67 Pall Mall a few years ago, where we went through older vintages from Sandhi and got to taste some from 2010. And it was just really fabulous to see, because at that point, it was really difficult to find wines from you that had age on them. And it was really wonderful to see the progression, not just in the style, but also how well they aged too. So that's definitely something that is really wonderful to be able to have now, is buying these bottles and knowing how well that they'll sort of lay down. So at the sourcing table, we work with Sandhi and Evening Land. So I think maybe Sandhi's a really good place to start. I'm going to share my screen now, so bear with me while I figure out the logistics of that. Okay. because I've got some really great, like a really nice picture of Raj and Sashi. So this is Sashi, who is not on the call, but is Raj's business partner and also winemaker for the project along with Raj. Would you say is accurate to say that sort of Sashi was more of the winemaker from at the start as you sort of got to grips with how all that worked?
Oh yeah, 100%. No, he definitely he had all the knowledge. I had mostly theory knowledge from talking to people, and I made a few vintages and a few mistakes, many mistakes. So definitely he was the one who kind of was more, classically trained as a winemaker, and then slowly we collaborated and we had the same ideas. And he's taught me so much over the years and continues to, for sure.
Yeah, he's a really fantastic winemaker too. He also makes the Piedrasassi wines for anyone that hasn't come across those, which are sort of very pure Northern Rhone-esque style of Californian Syrah. Right, so we're going to move to Santa Barbara. So I've just pulled up a map so everyone can kind of know sort of where it is in terms of the rest of California. So I wanted to talk about why you guys decided to do Santa Barbara and Santa Rita Hills, and also talk about some of the vineyards. So how did that come about? How did you find those vineyards? Well, you planted them, but how did you find those sites?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, before all of this, I was definitely more interested in high acid and wines that are more fresher and not, because in 2000 and in the mid 2000s, most of the California popular wines were big, heavy, rich, more on oak, more on ripeness, and so I was always looking for freshness. And I met the great Jim Clendenin and made a few vintages with him before even I met Sashi, and that was when I really understood that, because we made some Chardonnay from Sonoma Coast, from Pinot Noir from Anderson Valley, and Santa Rita Hills, and realized that how unique the Santa Rita Hills was. And not until actually I moved down here, I had really understood the geology, how close to the ocean it is. It's always kind of cool. Right now we're in July, and today is high. I live not far from the vineyards, and it's cloudy, and today's high will be maybe 24, 25 degrees Celsius. This morning was 11 degrees Celsius. So we have this very, very cool growing season in the summer months. So we don't have the ripening is very slow and very gentle. So we have very high acidity. And so I decided that Santa Rita Hills is going to be the place I want to kind of settle in and make wine in. And that's how we ended up here. I understood the soils much later on after I moved here, but I just knew the acidity here is key, what I wanted the wine to be. So the Central Coast Chardonnay, for example, those vineyards are all the way from Santa Rita Hills to where I live here in Cambria. So we have many vineyards in San Luis Obispo County. That's when we changed the appellation from Santa Barbara County. I mean, in 2019, changed to Central Coast to include some vineyards up in the Rio Grande, San Luis Obispo County area, just further north of Santa Rita Hills.
I suppose that's probably a good point to start talking a little bit about this. So the Central Coast Chardonnay is the one that's in the Wine Club case, and some of you are drinking it this evening. So the first vintage was 2019, correct? And the 2020 is the second one. So what made you decide? Because it used to be sort of just was it Santa Barbara County before?
Yeah, we were just having a hard time finding good vineyards farmed the way we wanted to in Santa Barbara County. So it was just, and also we want to keep the wine at a reasonable price, and so it was just hard to get vineyards in Santa Rita Hills, and so that's why we kind of moved slightly up north. Also, I moved here, so I'm pretty close to vineyards. I'm closer to the vineyards of Central Coast than Lompoc. I'm 20 minutes away from many of our vineyards where I live personally, and then the vineyards of Santa Rita Hills are, so they're kind of similar in distance to the ocean. and they have the same kind of brightness, but we have access to many other vineyards up north for that bottling.
And I think, it's really lovely because the Sandhi wines, a lot of them are single vineyard wines and really sort of terroir specific and are more premium. And this is a much more affordable option. It's quite a nice entry into your Sandhi style. How does it differ in the way that you make it compared to the single vineyard wines?
No difference at all. Everything is made exactly the same way. Grapes come in, we crush it, we press it. We don't add any yeast, we don't add any acid, we don't add it just gets straight, it goes into a barrel, it ferments in the barrel, and then the Central Coast, the only difference is we bottle it usually 10 to 11 months after aging, and the single vineyards are in a barrel for 10 to 11 months, and then they're racked into a tank for additional 4 to 6 months. So that's the only difference. Everything else in the same way that we had a little sulfur bottling, and that's pretty much it. So there's no major change in winemaking. We don't block the mallow, we don't block anything. And the wine is made completely on its own, all indigenous yeast without any additives.
And is that indigenous yeast sort of from across all the vineyards that you work with on that site as well?
Everyone, yeah. We don't add yeast to anything.
It's I mean, I've been really lucky and tasted quite a few of your Sandhi wines and different single vineyard ones, and I absolutely love the Central Coast Chardonnay because it is very approachable as well. It's got a really nice fleshy character to it. It's, you can open, like I opened this about half an hour ago and it's already drinking really lovely. Is that something you kind of were aiming for as well? Is that real drinkability?
Yeah, we want something which is fresh and delicious and unctuous, and having the natural acidity, and a wine that you can drink young. And I've had, the other day I tasted a 2011 Santa Barbara County, and it was still fresh and youthful. And so the wines can be aged for 4, 5, 10 years. It just depends what style of wine you like, but it can be drunk on release, and that's the whole idea. So you can pour by the glass at a restaurant, or you can have it at home. Usually it tastes better day 2, like most young white wines do, just when they kind of get some air and get some more some flesh on your mouth.
Yeah, I actually had a 2015 Santa Barbara Chardonnay about 6 months ago, and it was really good. So I can definitely say from experience that also does work very well, even when they've been shipped over to the UK. I'm going to just show you a few pictures of the vineyards. So this is actually more Domaine de la Cote than Sandhi. So maybe that's a good time to start talking about those Pinots as well. I guess people talk a lot about the Burgundian influence in these two wines. And I think when you look at the vineyards, you can kind of see just how small they are, which is, very typical in Burgundy too. What's your ethos with Domaine de la Cote? Sort of what's your approach to those wines?
Yeah, so this is a piece of land that Sashi found, and it's 100% his vision of, he lives very close to it. It's something I'm happy to be a part with him on this journey, because he found them, he developed them, he planted them exactly the way he wanted to do it. It's planted fairly densely, pretty low to the ground. For California vineyards, there are not many vineyards like this on these slopes, on these kind of shale soils, and pretty low yields in a really windy and cool part of the Santa Barbara County, only 8 miles from the ocean. I guess the vineyard size, the planting, and how they are made is the only thing Burgundian about them, because in Burgundy, their vineyards are not maritime climate. And so, of course, they're continental climate. So also the soils here are more shale-based. And in Burgundy, of course, we have limestone. So we have, of course, a lot of clay. And you can see that how the 30 million year old soils. Yeah, there are many similarities, but there are more differences, I think, especially if you taste the wine. It has a kind of saline quality because the ocean is so close, and you get the blooming kelp umami in the wines many times. You get the kind of saltiness from the ocean, the fog. Of course, these are very, in the summer months, the climate is also quite unique. but due to the low yields, we pick them usually. They're always picked most years between the last week of August and the second week of September, so around there. And they're pretty small vineyards, and the vineyard size is never going to change, as you know. That's the model which always stays true to Pinot Noir, because the true identity comes from the place where it's grown, and we try to stay out of the way. It did take us a number of years to kind of figure out how we're going to ferment it, how we're going to age it. And I think now we have those things kind of understood, and we kind of follow the vineyard and make the wine pretty much same way every year now. There's not that many changes. In the early years, we had many experimentations and different things, but now everything is mostly whole bunches, 90% plus whole bunches in concrete tanks, with no temperature control. Everything is done by hand, of course. No sulfur or anything is added in the wine. Goes through a natural ferment, usually 12 to 16 days, depending on the vintage. And then it's pressed, settled for a couple of days, and then aged in French oak barrels. It's aged between 12 to 16 months, depending on the vintage, and then bottled without any fining or filtration or anything. And we sulfur the wines at bottling, and that's pretty much pretty low mod sulfur also, and that's pretty much what it is. Vines are farmed organically. We use some regenerative things. We have sheep in the vineyard, and we rotate them and that kind of stuff. But it's pretty much a holistic thought process in the vineyards, and try to kind of bring out the identity of each of the parcels.
Yeah, regenerative farming is something I'm going to touch on a little bit later, because it's also become quite a big topic of conversation in the wine world in the UK at the moment as well. I know it's become quite a popular way and logical way of farming. But before I do that, so just wanted to make sure, so Domaine de la Cote is exclusively owned by you, but you work with other vineyards for Sandhi, is that correct? They're not sort of like
So we have around 20 hectares that is planted around Domaine de la Cote. 10 of it goes to Domaine de la Cote. The rest of it is a part of Sandhi. And so Sandhi owns around 25% of the vines that make Sandhi. So the Central Coast Chardonnay has probably 10% is vineyards planted around Domaine de la Cote. So Domaine de la Cote are the parcels, and then Sandhi is planted around them, the vineyard. So, but mostly Sandhi is from purchased grapes. Domaine de la Cote is 100% estate.
And I was going to say, you also make a Pinot Noir under Sandhi too. Is that Domaine de la Cote fruit?
That is primarily, it's ranges from 50 to 80% from the vineyards planted around Domaine de la Cote, depending on yield. We do buy some grapes also for Pinot Noir, yeah.
How does it work with, because obviously like with especially like vineyards like Sandhi and Benedict, where you have quite a few different people making amazing wines for them. Like I love tasting the Sandhi and Benedict alongside Arnott Roberts, for example. I think they're really wonderful comparisons. Yeah. How much influence do you get to have over the way that they're farmed? Do you have like a parcel that you work with the growers, or do you work it yourself, or?
Yeah, no, we had the same parcel we've had since 2009. The same rows. The farming has evolved from 2009 to now. The family that owns the vineyard has really brought a lot of people in and kind of changed a lot of things in the vineyard. So the farming is done entirely by the family that owns the vineyard, and we of course can go in and make any changes we need to make, but they are the ones who farm it. We don't do any work in the vineyard except only on Domaine de la Cote.
Also just wanted to touch back on in sort of farming and the way that different parcels work is with Domaine de la Cote, you have this beautiful vineyard called La Cote, which is at the top of the hill. And you also have a little plot in it called Sous le Chêne. And I wanted to see why you decided to sort of separate out the two. Is it Sous le Chêne's under the tree? Is that correct?
Yeah. There's an oak tree. When we planted the vineyard in 2007, the tree was kind of dying, and so we thought that we'll have to kind of take the tree down. And but as the vines got older, the tree got stronger, and so we decided to make the vineyard under the tree separately. We made it from 2009 onwards. We made that little section separately, and then it was different enough in 2016 that let's just bottle it separately, because it does. The tree now is flourishing, and it's amazing. It's probably a 300-year-old tree, a Pacific oak tree. So that's what we bottle Soulachen, which is a part of La Cote, but it's has a different kind of identity.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the flavor profile, that the way that it changes, even though it's a really small part of an already small vineyard. Yeah, so I'm very lucky. I have a bottle of 2017 Soulachen that I'm desperately trying not to drink. So I'm very excited to give that another try in the future. Got to drink that on release, so that was cool. But yeah, it's definitely one to look out for. That's really amazing to taste them side by side. I've also got some nice photos of you in the winery. So you use a combination of sort of cement and oak, is that correct?
Yeah, most of Domaine de la Cote is all in concrete. These are made here in Paso. Yeah, and we have some oak Terranso fooders tanks, and we use them if they have extra fruit, but mostly everything is in concrete.
Yeah, just like these ones right here. Bridget has a wonderful question, actually. So why did you decide to name Sandhi Sandhi? Where did the name come from?
Yeah, it means collaboration. It means unity and alliance. Just because we work with, we always had, we buy so many grapes, and when we started, we had to borrow things, and people gave us barrels, and it was a true collaborative effort in 2009 and 10 when it was only me and Sashi, and we had one intern, and that's it. Mm. So the name is an homage to all those who came together to make the identity of Sandhi come alive.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've always loved about the Californian wine community, is how everyone's sort of friends with each other and helps each other out. And so many winemakers got their start because other people sort of helped them or gave them a section of their cellar to work in and that kind of thing. So it's very apt. So I think maybe now I'm just really aware that I need to try and get through quite a large amount of stuff in a very short period of time. So I want to move on to Oregon, which is obviously very different to California, and specifically to the Willamette Valley, which is the AVA you guys are working in with Evening Land. And you touched on earlier about how you sort of founded Sandhi and Domaine de la Cote, and then you came around to Oregon and bought Seven Springs. And I sort of wanted to know why you decided to branch out into Oregon and how it differs to California in the way that you make the wines and the terroir and everything like that.
Yeah, I've always loved Oregon. In fact, in my early years of my journey of learning how to make wine, I made a wine from Seven Springs in 2007 and 2008, a small amount of wine. Bought grapes from them and made it right there, and so our investor, who is our partner in Domaine de la Cote, he also was a majority partner in Evening Land and Seven Springs, and they were making a lot of wine there in between 2010 and 2013. So he asked us if we would like to take over Evening Land, and me and Sashi responded yes, but we only want Seven Springs. We don't want to make all the other, because they were making wine. Evening Land at the time was making wine from all over the place, Burgundy and Sonoma, and so we had it was a challenging number of years, starting in 2014, taking over Seven Springs, and then deciding not to. We had 3 years of inventory of other wines we didn't make, so it was a kind of long 3 years of moving past, recreating identity, and really kind of putting the vineyard forward. It's a historic vineyard planted in the 80s. And also the vineyard most of it had phylloxera. So we've We've been replanting since we took over in 2014. So it's just been a huge work in progress. But again, being in Oregon, it's the community is amazing and has embraced the vineyard, and there's many people who've made wine from the vineyard, and it's pretty cool. It's totally different than California, especially from the maritime climate of Domaine de la Cote, even though they're sister estates. Here the soils are completely different. They're volcanic soils, so acidic soils. It's truly a continental climate. You could have like right now, the harvests are going to be, I think, more than a month apart. And so that's one reason we kind of also thought about it. Like Domaine de la Cote is usually, late August, early September, and here usually it's late September, early October. So we have a chance to kind of do 2 full harvests. The wines are made in a very similar way. We use less whole cluster in Oregon because the clusters are much larger and the skins are thicker. Primarily, that's the main reason. But the philosophy of the wines are pretty similar in both places. And the farming is also, the farming was set up by Dominique Lafont, who was a consultant in the early years, and he kind of farmed them biodynamically in his way. And so we kind of followed that and kind of kept what he had started in 2007, 8. It's pretty similar now, the way it's farmed.
And sorry, because Darren's got some wonderful questions here. So one of them being, how old are the vines at Seven Springs? So you're saying they're planted in the 80s, but you've had to plant some.
It's planted in it's not clear if it's 82, 83, because I've had some bottles of 85, so might have been 82, but unlabeled bottles. So yeah, in the 80s, but most of the old vines have been replanted starting in 2002, and we are still slowly replanting sections of the original vines because they were unrooted at the time and they all have phylloxera, so we've slowly kind of transitioned from there.
And you've got so with the actual sort of I'm just going to move on to some nice pictures of the vineyards, but with the actual wines that you make, I know you've got things like single plots, like La Source, for example. How do you figure out which is going to be a single plot wine and which aren't?
So La Source is kind of, I won't say a single plot. It's basically the upper part of the vineyard. The old vines used to go, and we knew that we were going to ultimately replant them. So the lower section of the vineyard and the middle section is the estate wine. And then the upper section planted in 2002. So La Source is mostly from vines which are 20 plus years old. And the estate wines is, I guess, they are probably like 12 years old. And then we also have Salem Wine Company, which is wines which are under 10 years old. So that's how we kind of slowly kind of separate them over. But mostly the La Source are the upper blocks, which were all planted around 2002.
Sorry, I've got another question, but it's related to Domaine de la Cote, which I'm always love to talk about. And I also apologize if my pronunciation is terrible. This is when you realize that I'm very good at writing these things down and terrible at pronouncing them. So the diatomaceous shale, is it unique to Domaine de la Cote?
It's very unique to any wine growing region. There's not that many places in the world where there's diatomaceous earth. It's a very kind of flaky, silica-based rock, and it's formed from fossilized algae, as opposed to like limestone is fossilized planktons. So they're kind of different, and they're it's just very flaky. And it's quite unique to the San Rita Hills, and Domaine de la Cote was planted on those soils.
I mean, I think it's quite a good question to ask because, there's lots of very intense wine nerds that have been studying this for a long time, but not everyone necessarily understands it, is the relationship between soil and flavor. How would you best sort of describe that? Because it's people will throw out the word mineral a lot. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of it, and it's kind of a very broad and slightly vague term. But with places like Domaine de la Cote that have this incredibly unique soil that's so specific, and their flavor profile is so specific, how do you feel that relates? Is there like an easy way to explain it?
I mean, of course, the soil is very important, because you have living soil. And when you have living soil, it definitely reacts with the rock formation. If you don't have living soil and you have dead soil, then it doesn't matter what the rock is. But if you have living soils and you really have, rocky soils, I think it's a lot to do with the vigor of the vine, how you planted it, the density you planted it, what you planted it with. I think it's a whole kind of bigger picture. It's hard to relate with just the rock and the flavor of the wine, because we've all had, wine from a famous vineyard, which is maybe on limestone or on granite or on volcanic, and different producers have different kind of their touch, and that comes from mostly the farming aspect. I think that is very important, how we keep our soils alive. So at Domaine de la Cote and here in the volcanic soils of Evening Land and Seven Springs, the soils are alive, and they kind of hopefully just transmit the place, which is like the vineyard here right now. This is a parcel called Forêt, Clos de Forêt, and it's encompassed in this forest, and it's shaded, and it's you see how green even the grass is, and that's just Oregon, because it rains all through the summer. The same if you look at the vineyard in Domaine de la Cote. At the same time, this is probably in July or maybe early August. The soils it's mostly, all the grass is brown, and the canopy is much smaller, and the shoots are much lower to the ground, and it's just a different place, drier climate, and completely opposites, both Oregon and California coast.
Does it ever get a bit confusing or difficult to have to sort of work on two very different plots through this I mean, one is later for picking, but it's quite a similar growing period? Do you have to sort of retune your brain every time you go from one to the other?
Yeah, for sure, because you have to think about, in Domaine de la Cote, a cluster of Pinot, could be 50 grams or less, and a cluster of Pinot in Seven Springs is 150 grams. So, the skins are different. So your extraction is, you can be a lot more aggressive in Domaine de la Cote, and the wines will still be light. And in Seven Springs, your extraction has to be very gentle. Otherwise, you're going to over extract and get the bitter tannins you don't want. So, you definitely have to think the right way and kind of have a plan. You can't make the exact same wine, because two very different climates and different soils.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a challenge to sort of be able to do both so quickly in quick succession. But I mean, the wines obviously do speak for themselves. Sorry to say end of that one. I've got a question so there's a Master of Wine student who couldn't join us tonight, who sent me some really great questions. I'm not going to ask all of them because some of them are very nerdy, but great. But she's got a couple that I think would be nice to talk about now. She said, would anything make you and Sashi change your mind about how you currently make your wines in both places? Is there any factors that would make you change the way you do things quite drastically?
No, I think, it took us so long to figure it out. It takes so long from the first vintage in 2009 for Domaine de la Cote. And if you look at it in, for example, the 2020 vintage, a decade or so later, I mean, we've completely in the opposite direction of what we were. Extraction was so much more. So it took us a decade to figure it out. And we kind of, now we know the direction we want to be in. Of course, with climate change and this erratic, weather patterns we have, we have to be more in tune. We can't do things too drastically, because the next year could be completely different. So we have to kind of, play with nature and kind of be more in tune and try to do things in a more holistic way. So no, I won't change anything.
With just on the topic of climate change, with the wines in California, do you have much risk of fire where you're currently working?
Well, at this point, you can have fire anywhere in the world.
Yeah, well, it's been wildfires in London yesterday, so
So it's just as we get warmer and drier, yeah, there's risk everywhere. No one can ever say, oh yeah, I'm risk free. So touch wood, we haven't had any in our area, but you just never know, and a lot of these things just happen by mistake, or when a couple of years ago, when we in the north coast of California, there was all these dry thunderstorms and dry lightning without any rain, which caused so many fires. So yeah, you never know what happens, because we just don't have a grasp of this the magnitude of this climate change we have.
Darren's asked a really lovely question, which is, does a Meursault style of Chardonnay interest you, Raj?
Yeah, I learned from Jean-Marc Rouleau. He taught me how. So yeah, they definitely, we follow his style, or his from the way he thinks about wine. So yeah, I mean, in the end, Senorita Hills is Senorita Hills, but our compasses are pointed towards people who made great wine for a long time, and it happens to be Burgundy, and my mentor is Jean-Marc. So yeah.
Philip has asked, any thoughts on any other varietals other than Chardonnay or Pinot for your projects, which is actually a great question to segue into some of the other things that Raj is currently doing. But I'll let you answer first.
Yeah, Domaine de la Côte, we have a little aligoté, a small amount. We have some Gamay and Chenin Blanc in Seven Springs. So yeah, there's a little bit, focus is still Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but yeah, we do make some sparkling wine, make a pet nat once in a while as vintage. Yeah.
And the sparkling wine you made, that I remember I've tasted that was made with Michael Cruz, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Michael finishes the wine, because we can vinify the wine. I'm just not. We don't have the expertise to really do the tirage, and he's so good at it. So he's been doing it for us for a number of years now.
So for those that aren't aware of Michael Cruz's wine, so Michael Cruz makes an amazing champagne method sparkling out in California called Aquamarine, which never finds its way to the UK. But if you find yourself in America and you find a bottle, definitely buy it, because it's absolutely sensational. And he is the gentleman who helps finish the wine, the champagne method sparkling that Raj and Sashi make. One last thing before I move on to your other projects and some of the other great varieties. Oh, actually, Darren's got another great question. So what is the Salem Wine Co. entry-level collaboration with Sager and Wild? So obviously you and Michael are very good friends. And is there more Gamay in that blend, or how does it work?
We did, let's see, what did we do with? No, for Michael, we did two cuvées. One was done from Domaine de la Côte. That was the first, I think maybe 13 vintage. There was not Salem Wine Company. The label looks similar, but it's not Salem Wine Company. Salem Wine Company is only from the Seven Springs vineyard. 13, we did a Pinot Noir for Sager and Wild from Domaine de la Côte. Maybe it was 12. Maybe it was 12 or 13. And then we did another Field and Farm special bottling for Sager and Wild. I think that was maybe in 2018. Yeah.
And then was Salem 2019 that you did for, because you did the Salem Pinot as well for Sager and Wild. I can't remember which vintage it was now.
No, we didn't do no Salem Wine Company for Sager and Wild. No,
the label was quite similar.
The label was quite similar. Yeah. Label, yeah. We're going to use the same design, just instead of Salem Wine Company, we put Sager and Wild. So the label is very similar, but no, Salem Wine Company is only from Oregon, only from these vineyards here, the younger vines up on the ridge. The younger vines we put on the Salem Wine Company. Anything which is like 3 to 5 to 7 years, around that time, that goes in the Salem Wine Company. And then as the vines get older, it goes into estate wine.
Perfect. So just the picture I've got up here just has reminded me of another question that Melissa, who's the MW student, has asked me. And correct me if I'm wrong, because my eyesight's terrible, but she talks about whether or not you've ever planted vineyards on a single stake, which is something that Clemens Busch, for example, does in Germany. And our mutual friend Christina, who's on this call, is currently experimenting with out in Oxfordshire as well. And it kind of looks a little bit like you do in this vineyard, but I could also just be completely...
Yeah, no, in this vineyard is not. It's a classic VSP, but Juliet in the Juliet vineyard in Domaine de la Cote is planted on single stakes. They are just one, it's just one hillside, and it looks more like a Rhone or a German vineyard than it does anything California. It's Chardonnay grown on a single stake and just tied around the stake and grown inshallah. Yeah.
What was your decision for doing that? Sort of how does it affect the result?
It's a small, 2 acres, and everything is done by hand, no tractors, no till, just kind of an experiment to see, it's really concentrated, high energy Chardonnay. Because that's how all vines were planted back in the day before tractors were invented. Everything was planted in stakes, and then slowly kind of things moved away, but they couldn't change these kind of plantings in their own because no tractor can go through the vineyards anyway, so it stayed the same way. So we were always inspired by the old style of planting.
I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. And so just with the sort of last bit of time we got left, so also if anyone still has any questions, please just keep them coming. Darren Lay, it's great. I love all these questions that you're bringing up with. What is the role of Dominic Lafon in 2022? Is he involved at all, or?
Oh no, he was only involved from 2007 till 14.
And now you sort of, because you were saying you sort of you work with his methodology, but kind of
we worked with his same idea. He's just a dear friend, and he's retired now from all winemaking, which is good for him. But yeah, I think he's loved the vineyard, and we talk about the vineyard often. But he's doesn't do anything with us since 14.
So on the subject of the Sega and Wild wine that we talked about earlier, and you mentioned Phelan Farms, it's a project I really wanted to talk to you about because I think the wines will be in the UK at some point. I can't remember if that's
Michael Sager's picking them up.
With Sager and Wine, yeah.
Hopefully they'll be there end of the year. Depends how long the shipping takes these days. Everything takes longer than.
We'll see them next summer. But yeah, so this is something to look forward to. But I just wanted to sort of ask, because it's some of my colleagues went to visit you, and it's a really magical place. And I just wanted to know sort of why you decided to take on this project, and if you could explain a little bit about regenerative farming, because it's something that's also become a very popular and very valid wine sort of growing approach in all over the world at the moment.
Well, during the pandemic, there were many people changed their lives, and I was one of them. I decided to move to a little town of Cambria and take over this property, which was at the time from 2016 to 2019 was under lease of Sandhi, and we used to put the wine in our Central Coast or put it in the wine club and different things we did with it. It's a 4.5 hectare property, 4 different vineyards, and initially it was all Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but mostly Pinot, and then in 2018, I started grafting other varieties, mostly the Jura, Savoie varieties. So we have one parcel which has Chardonnay, little pink Chardonnay, pink skin Chardonnay, and then it has a kind of a co-blend of Trousseau, Mencia, and a little Palomino, Mission, Alicante Boucher, and a bunch of things. And then the second parcel is Gamay and Pinot Noir, the original Pinot Noir, and then I grafted Gamay. And then the third parcel had Sauvignon Vert, Sauvignon Jaune, and Pulsar. And then the last parcel, which has evolved slowly, has Mondus, Jacquer, Altes, and Granger. So that was been happening since 2018 quietly. I wasn't And the initial idea was to make just some wine club wines and kind of, keep it that way. And then I realized that pandemic is here, no one's traveling for a while. It's a good chance to just go off the grid and be in one place, because previous to that I was flying and being in London and Paris every month. And so now I live in a small town and focus only on farming these vines. It's myself, my girlfriend, and I have an assistant. Three of us kind of farm 4.5 hectares, and we do everything by hand. We don't use any tractors. It's dry grown. We don't do any, no tilling, no plowing, no mowing. We have sheep grazing. We have chickens. We have a couple of dogs. Planted a small apple orchard. Everything is, all the treatments in the vineyard are more on a holistic. So we don't spray any sulfur or copper or any commercial sprays. Everything is a home brew, unless there's an outbreak of some sort, like we have last week. So I had to buy some bacillus to spray. So it's mostly, also the place is very much in a canyon. So it does not look like a vineyard. It looks like more of a random piece of vines in between a forest. So we kind of keep it that way. So it's not tidy and perfect. So it's not like, we don't do any hedging, or we don't do any, so it's very messy. But we bottle the first vintage. Everything is bottled sans souf. Everything is pretty much what it is. It's a very cool climate. It's we pick everything in October. At least last year we did, and the year before. So yeah, that's pretty much the kind of whole thing. And then also we buy some grapes, and we started a small thing last year, much bigger this year. Completely opposite to Field and Farm. We have a new brand identity of something which is the real history of California, and that's vineyards in Southern California in Cucamonga Valley. So we are buying grapes from these old 100-year-old vineyards that have been sprayed and of course dry grown, and we have a small facility in LA making those wines this year. So, and the harvest is completely at different times. So those are the two new things which are in the horizon.
Is that with LA River Company? The
LA River Company is different. LA River Company is Abe Schoner's.
Yeah, no, I meant, is it the same sort of space that you're using? Because I know that he's using space.
Yeah. We share the space. There's the City and Wine Company and the LA River Wine Company. Yeah, we share the same space and same vineyards, but they're two different identities.
Yeah, no, I just was thinking to myself, it's like, this project sounds quite familiar, but I think it's a different, like it's Abe doing one thing and you're doing the other. With the amount of grapes that you've planted, they're obviously all quite different at Field and Farms as well. What was it made you decide to do that, especially with the Jura varieties?
When I went there first, the place looked like it seemed more, it was like, could be in Tuscany or could be in the Jura and Savoie. Just trees everywhere, a couple of creeks around, and it's just it's kind of it's hard to explain. It's just a kind of a wild place. It's not as pristine and precise as Domaine de la Cote or anything else. Yeah. Can hear
Sorry,
you.
just slightly failed in my, getting towards the end, and have slightly failed at Zoom. It's only been 3 years of using Zoom, so you'd think I'd get better at it. Let's do that. There we go. So I also wanted to say, because so at Field and Farms as well, it's mostly grapes, but you said you're growing apple trees. Are you thinking of doing any other sort of fermented beverages at all? You think you're branching out into cider? Because I know Jamie Kutch and Mikey at Scar of the Sea are both experimenting a bit with cider making.
Oh no, Mikey is amazing. Mikey is like, he has a whole cider. I mean, he's made cider for a long time, so he's very experienced.
Yeah, he sent a couple of his ones over to the UK when my colleagues went, and they were amazing. I'm very into UK cider. It's kind of like my thing. So it was fabulous tasting them. He's very talented.
So I planted 48 trees, and they all are different cider apple varieties. And in fact, after this Zoom, I'm heading to the farm. Magnus Nielsen is here from
cool.
So he's showing him the orchard and what we're doing. Mikey's also, we all are meeting up later on today. So yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know much about apples. It's something I learn, and hopefully I'll make a cider, but more not for a cider. I want to make a co-fermentation like I did last year. I did a bottling called Bottle Baby, and that's basically apples co-fermented with different grapes on field and farm. So eventually I want to do it with my own apples. So right now I'm buying the apples.
Yeah, that what you've just described is something that a few different cider makers are doing in the UK with really great results, and especially people like Charlie Herring and Find and Foster down in Devon. They're both a really good way to use sort of waste product from the wineries too, to sort of do those co-ferments with either the skins or any leftover fruit that they want to work with, and they're great. So I'm really excited to hear more about that.
Yeah, Michael Sager is going to get a small amount of it, so I guess
knock on his door. Joe Laurie has another really fantastic question, which is, in the spectrum of farming approaches, for example, organic, biodynamic, sustainable, etc., where does regenerative farming sit?
It sits, it's organic. That's you have to be certified organic to get. I'm going to go for certification eventually when I can start filling our forms. So definitely it's organic, plus with other pillars like environmental issues of sequestering carbon and using animals is a big part of the whole agricultural system, and also to be certified. There's a social element also in regenerative farming, at least for certification. So, no tilling, no plowing, using animals, using cover crops, those things are super important. I think for me, it's the only thing outside of organic which is important, because they actually test the soils. Because most people don't talk about that. The soils need to be tested, because there's a difference between soil and dirt has no microbes, and soil has microbes, and they do the work and really kind of make the wine. Wine is not made in the cellar. Wine is literally made under the ground, not even above the ground. It really, you have to let nature do its thing. And if you have certain shortages of minerals in the vines, they will come to balance when you have the right microbes under the vines. And that's something which regenerative farming, talks about, and I believe in that. So having animals already for the 1 year or year and a half now has made a big difference in the vineyards. And of course, we've never plowed or tilled this land since it was planted in 2007. I was lucky to kind of take over a piece of land that had never been tilled or plowed.
Cool. Sorry, just if anyone's got any more questions, I'm just going to sort of give you a chance to pop them in the box now. And I also just wanted to talk a little bit about, because Raj mentioned before he's got the wine club, which it's sort of like it's a way for you to make some other sort of very interesting wines. Like I've had a Mourvedre from your wine club range. Is it sort of more of an experiment, or how does it normally?
Yeah, then we make some one-offs here and there. We make like Syrah, we made some Mirage sometimes. So we don't always make the same wine every year, depending on what grapes I have, depending on the vintage. So there's a small amount of wines we have in the wine club that's outside of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And sometimes we're doing a bunch of small cuvee Chardonnay and Pinot from different parcels that don't go to Sandhi or Domaine Cote goes into the wine club. So it's just a different range of wines, and completely no rhyme or reason, just things. Yeah.
Wonderful. Darren's got another great question, which is Chardonnay your favorite grape? And if so, why? And if not, what would you pick?
Well,
Mean
I,
question.
at this stage, I would say it's definitely one of my favorite grapes. I don't drink a lot of Chardonnay. I drink more Sauvignon than I do Chardonnay. So I drink everything. Is this, I drink everything. Macabeo, I drink Riesling. But yeah, Chardonnay is definitely something which has captured me for a long time, because it really, it really is a neutral grape, and the place where it's grown and the élevage defines it, and it works really well in our area here. So we are super excited.
Wonderful. And then Paul has asked, what's the philosophy behind Sansouf? Have you experimented with making the same wines with and without sulfur?
Oh yeah, for sure. We've done. There are always Sansouf barrels of Domaine de la Cote or Sandhi. We bottle separately, small amounts. See, no, it's not Sansouf is not just a dogma. Just there are many of wines which see no sulfur in the vineyard and in the cellar. So if I think it needs it for the chemistry, if the VA is high or the pH is unstable, then we would add sulfur. It's not a dogmatic approach of no sulfur wines.
So I think, is it Pure that's the Domaine de la Cote wine that you sort of do exclusively Sansouf?
We only did it for a couple of years. Yeah, we only made that wine twice, I think so.
Yeah, it was a fun one to taste. It was really interesting tasting it next to the other wines from the range, and also the Sandhi Pinot. It was really,
yeah. There's always stuff in the cellar. We keep a barrel of hand bottle a little bit, and things which we keep here at home. Yeah.
If anyone's got any more questions, I'm going to just ask one more that Melissa, the Master of Wine student, had, and then I will let you all get to your evening, because we've all got dinner and Raj has lots of other fun stuff to do. So Melissa has said, when you touched on this a little bit before, but I just want to sort of go into a little bit more detail before we leave, which is the wines that you make and you and Sashi create together always have like remarkable freshness, acidity, and etc. And she wanted to say, what are the picking decisions that you do? How does that factor in, and how does it compare to your peers who are maybe making wines in a similar area but they're sort of different in the way that the freshness and acidity kind of comes across?
Yeah, that it's always been something that's defined our style from the beginning, because we would rather pick something brighter with more acidity than pick something riper with more flesh. And so if we make a decision, because we are sampling and tasting the grapes and really kind of try to capture the freshness of the vintage, and we would rather pick something slightly underripe, more acidity, than overripe with lower acidity. That's something which is very important to us, and we want that freshness and brightness. And sometimes it just comes from the élevage. Sometimes it comes just as the wine is aging. So yeah, it's part of our ethos, and we believe in that, and we've never acidified. So we retain the freshness of the acidity, and we've never stopped mallow either.
Darren has another great question, which is, do you like the Kelly Fox wines?
Yeah, I haven't had too many, but what I've had, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you so much for joining us this evening, Raj. I really appreciate it. And I know that everyone on this call's definitely enjoyed it. I've also recorded the session, so there's a few people that haven't been able to make it that will be able to sort of tune in. And I'll send a copy to Katie as well, so she can send it on to people, whoever might want to watch it on your end too. But yeah, thank you everyone as well for joining in. I know that everyone has stuff to do, and it's pretty hot in London in the UK at the moment, so everyone probably wants to go outside. So thank you so much for joining. And thank you, Raj.
Thank you guys. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to just finish this one now. So I will be in touch with some of you after this as well, just to let you know some of the wines that we've got available. But I will probably do that tomorrow morning because my my fiance says dinner is ready and my tummy is rumbling. So thank you so much. It was really nice to see you all, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.